Okay, great, 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 great.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, we are learning all about the actual shaking of the arba minim, the dalid minim, and we were learning about what you can use for schach if you need to use the dalid minim. For can you use the dalid minim? Do you need to use the dalid minim for schach? In other words, when you put the branches on top of your sukkah, is it supposed to be from specifically from the things that the lulav and esrog and hadassim and aravis are acceptable from, or can it be from any branches? And there seems to be an argument between
Yeah,
Rabbi Yehuda
yeah,
and uh, and the
yeah.
rabbis if that is a necessity to be from the Dalit Minim. Rabbi Yehuda learned it from Rabbi Yehuda had learned it from a Kal V'chomer, which was an a priori argument, proving that if the sukkah, if the lulav has to be from the dalid minim, from the four species specifically, then for sure the sukkah, which is more chamor, it has to be by day and by night. You have to eat in the sukkah. For sure, a sukkah would need to be roofed with the dalid minim, the things from the four species. So he learned the Kal V'chomer. The rabbis seem to bring two or three proofs that disprove Rabbi Yehuda. What were the proofs that, excuse me, what were the proofs that the rabbis brought? Rabbi Yehuda made a Kal V'chomer, and the rabbi said, nah, that's not a good Kal V'chomer, that's not a good proof. So the first thing they said was a Kal V'chomer that ends up being a leniency is not a Kal V'chomer. Yesterday we understood it, the logic behind that rule. The Rashi spelled out the logic, bottom of 36b. Rashi had spelled out uh, how exactly the Kal V'chomer works and how this rule it ruins a Kal V'chomer. How does a Kal V'chomer work? The Kal V'chomer works that in fact, the Gemara always uses the term din when it talks about a Kal V'chomer. Din means logic. It's logical. What's the logic? Why is it so logical? Because it's like saying if a thin person weighs 100 pounds, so a fat person for sure weighs 100 pounds. Now it's logic. If what's the Kal V'chomer here? If the uh, law of lulav is which is only an obligation by day, if that requires the daled minim, you need it, but it's much more lenient. It's only an obligation by day, but it's still for that we need to have the four species for sure. A sukkah, which is by night and by day, it's much more strict law that by sukkah you're not allowed to eat outside of a sukkah or dwell outside of a sukkah, sleep outside of a sukkah, any by night or by day. So for sukkah, for sure, it should be limited to the daled minim. That was his Kal V'chomer. So the rabbis had a number of problems with that. One of them was that the Kal V'chomer is going to end up being a leniency because you're going to end up having a situation where you're not going to have one of the daled minim, one of the four species um, available. And you're going to end up saying, okay, I guess I'm exempt from the sukkah. So what you're trying to do is say that this law is much more strict, but you're going to end up making it more lenient. Um, you're going to cause it to be that, okay, so you're exempt from the sukkah. You're saying how strict, how serious it is. Now you're going to end up saying, you know what, we don't even have to dwell in the sukkah because you're missing if you're missing the daled minim, you no longer available. It ends up being lenient. It ends up being, you're trying to make it strict. You end up making a leniency in the end. And that's for sure wrong because you're showing how strict it is. Now, That was one problem. Another problem is the pasuk seems to include kol davar. The pasuk includes all types of roofing that is from the soilas dogon v'yakiv, from the I don't know a good word for this, but the shavings of the extras, the leftovers of the goyren v'yakiv, of the the threshing floor and the vat, which means any of the cuttings, the leftover shavings of the trees. That's what you're supposed to use for the sukkah, for the srach. So the pasuk includes, and it implies anything that comes from the ground, anything that grows. That's you're supposed to be using for your srach. So you can't limit it with the kal v'chomer if the pasuk itself specifically includes everything. Now, commentaries struggle a little with this, because you could say, well, maybe because the pasuk includes everything, therefore we need a kal v'chomer to exclude it. In other words, you could say that maybe that's specifically it, that the pasuk is inclusive, and the kal v'chomer is coming to exclude things. This is like how do you if you have a good kal v'chomer, which this reasoning is saying, even if the kal v'chomer is a good kal v'chomer, not like we just said that we can disprove the kal v'chomer. Let's say the kal v'chomer is good, but nevertheless we have a problem of where it says basukkah is teishvu, that it says you should dwell in the sukkah. It means sukkah shall kol davar, sukkah of anything. Now. The commentaries take this question a step further. They say the fact that the pasuk needs to teach that you're able to use anything for schach. Why does the pasuk have to come and include everything? It must be that kal v'chomer is a good kal v'chomer, and that's why the pasuk is going to include everything. That maybe that's not a good way of pushing off a kal v'chomer. In other words, why is the pasuk coming and including everything? It must be that kal v'chomer maybe is not a problem. You normally would learn a kal v'chomer. Why is the pasuk including everything? Because we're afraid you're going to learn the kal v'chomer, and therefore the pasuk has to come and include everything. So they want to take it. They take this idea. In other words, there's a pasuk that seems to include everything. You have a kal v'chomer that minimizes it to only the daled minim. So one of the commentaries asks, he says, "Well, you wanted to disprove the kal v'chomer. The pasuk seems to tell us that no, you don't have a good disproof for the kal v'chomer. The only thing to disprove the kal v'chomer is this pasuk. This pasuk is basically the proof that the kal v'chomer is a good kal v'chomer, and the pasuk comes along and says, no, it's not good. So maybe this shows that a kal v'chomer, even if it ends up being a leniency, maybe it's still considered a good kal v'chomer. Maybe you could see that from the pasuk. This is one of the questions that's asked on this. So he says it actually works the opposite way, that the pasuk shows you that this is not a good kal v'chomer. In other words, we learn from here, this is the source that a kal v'chomer that's going to cause you to act, to be lenient, doesn't work. It doesn't work. Where do we know such a thing from? How do we know that that's a way of disproving a kal v'chomer? Because our case, the pasuk comes along and teaches us that this is a scenario where you have a kal v'chomer. And guess what? Don't use that kal v'chomer because of this pasuk. So according to this way of learning, it ends up that's really one point, that we have a kal v'chomer. Rabbi Yehuda has a kal v'chomer. The rabbis come along and say, when actually we can't use such a kal v'chomer. Logically, it doesn't work. There's a problem with it. But how do we know that such a problem is considered a problem? Because the pasuk itself clearly says that by the sukkah, you're supposed to have kol mili. You can have any types of species. It doesn't have to be from the daled minim, only from the four. So that's this is the source that such a kal v'chomer doesn't work. This is how the Gemara understands that the kal v'chomer that has a little issue with it, where it ends up being a leniency. This type of kal v'chomer is not a valid way of learning learning a kal v'chomer. That's how they understand this Gemara, that it's like this is the source of this. Now, then the Gemara said we have a story from Ezra. And the reason why would the pasuk? Why do we need another proof? What is the benefit? So there is a concept that stories seem to be maybe even more proof than straight halacha. Here, Ezra tells the Jewish people to take all these different types of species for their sukkah. So that seems to be like you see in practice that we use that they're all acceptable. Now, the Gemara says, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with this? Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they had to build the walls and the schach. The walls are acceptable from any type of species, from any type of wood, or other items. The schach, the roofing of the sukkah, that has to be specifically from the daled minim. Then the Gemara brought the explanation of Rava that about using ikra de dikla, sieve and ikra de dikla. This was the first statement on the Mishnah that we mentioned, that what can you use to tie the lulav? And Rava said that even though Rabbi Yehuda says that it needs to be b'mina, it has to be with its species, but don't think that means that it's one of the daled minim itself you're tying the lulav with the hadassim and arabais. What it means is that even sieve and even ikra de dikla. What were those two things? Sieve was like the fiber that goes around the palm trees, which you sometimes see, I think, over here in Florida, the like a certain type of fiber that surrounds the tree, especially by the new growth. Sometimes you see it peeling off, or as the tree grows, like it's up by the top, close to where the branches branch out. Anyway,
Rabbi,
so that
yes, I have a picture if you want to see it.
Okay, that's fast, short, and sweet.
That's it.
So these little
fibers
that are branching out. So you tie the lulav with that. That's the sieve, seemingly. And then there's also a ikra de dikla. Ikra de dikla seems to be, Rashi uses a word to cut from it nitzarim, which is a term used for like wicker baskets, which the ikra de dikla literally means the trunk of the tree. And then Rashi says you're cutting off something and peeling it until it's fit. So you're cutting off something from the tree, some type of a shoot growing out of the tree, and peeling it, and till it's able to be used as like some type of string or something to tie around it. But ikra de dikla means the trunk. You're using the trunk of the tree. That's the literal translation. You're using the trunk of the tree. Rashi gives you an understanding what you're doing with that trunk. You're somehow cutting off some type of shoot from the trunk and peeling it, and you're going to be able to use it as a eged. So So the point is that these are not parts of the Dalit Minim. It's not literally the Dalit Minim. You're not really using this for your shaking. You're not shaking these as part of the mitzvah of shaking lulav and esrog, but it's part of the tree that the Dalit Minim come from. And Rava says, when Rabbi Yehuda says you need to use something to wrap it, to tie the Dalit Minim together, the lulav with the hadasim and aravas, you need to tie it together. It's got to be from one of those species, not exactly the species itself that you're using, but from the tree of that species. And that's what Rava's insight is. He's telling you that's not as strict as you think that it has to be. You have to use a hadas to tie your lulav together with the hadasim, or you have to use a myrtle branch, or you have to use an arava. No. Even if you use from the palm tree, it's from the palm tree. It's part of the trunk of the palm tree. You're allowed to use that as a string, as a wrapping material to wrap together, to tie it together. So you could use that. You could use the sieve, the fiber that's peeling off. You could use that as the that you could use that as the thing to tie, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So that's Rava's insight. And Rava's trying to prove that. And how does he prove it? So he says, Mana Amina, how do I know this? Where do I get this from? That the sieve and ikra, the dikla, is going to be okay. So he goes through this whole thing. But ultimately, what he says is that that you're able to use nesarim. You can use boards for you could use boards for schach, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So where do you get boards from? It must be that you're able to use the ikra de dikla. You could use the trunk. If you're getting a board, you must be able to you're using a trunk of the tree to get such a board. So it must be considered the min of the lulav. So what Rabbi Yehuda is saying about being strict, it has to be from the mina type, one of the species. He doesn't mean it to the fullest literal meaning that it has to be exactly what you shake. It puts it in a more of a loose way that it's from that tree, from the Dalit Minim trees, that you could use that to tie it. That's what Rava is getting at. The Gemara then says that really he holds that needs to be only from those things, that arba minim. The Gemara asked a question on the Brisa, because the Brisa had mentioned that the Sukkah needs to be. I really should clarify this. Maybe it's something that people are a little confused. Our Mishnah dealt with tying the lulav together. The Gemara said that doesn't only mean from the species itself that you shake, it means from the actual tree. Rava says, how do I know this? So then Rava brings a brisa. What is the brisa talking about? The brisa is talking about the sukkah being being roofed with what material? The sukkah being roofed with what material? Now, again, our Mishnah is talking about the lulav being tied. The Brisa and the Gemara is talking about roofed by certain material. And there is where Reb Yehuda says that it's the arba minim shabalulav. You need to use specifically those materials for your roofing of your sukkah. And that's where we have a kavachomer about the roofing of the sukkah. We have a kavachomer, again, it's from there. And on there, we have the Gemara bringing, disproving that kavachomer, and bringing a pasuk, in Ezra, a pasuk in Vayikra, and a pasuk in Ezra, or Nehemiah, I should say. And basically, we've proven that the the rabbis have a good reason why you should be able to use anything for the schach. Then the Gemara says, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that pasuk? And the Gemara explains that it's talking about the walls and not only the schach. Okay. Then the Gemara talks about, we have a Mishnah that talks about using what to use for schach. You could use beams. Now, how do you have beams if you're using lulavs? Lulav is not a beam. An esrog is not a beam. A hadas is not a beam. And a rav is not a beam. Must be other parts of those trees are also called minim, the minim of the dalamim. Now the Gemara says, so that you could use for schach, that you could also use to tie the lulav with the hadassim and aravos. I think that clarifies the confusion here, because we really talked about two separate things, and we connected the two. At the end, we connected and said, oh, so this is called the same min. It's called from that species. So for tying the lulav as well, we're going to call it from the same species. If you could use it for schach, you could use it to tie the lulav with the other species. Okay. Now comes the Gemara, and the Gemara says, really, you have to use these arba minim. What about erez? What about this other Gemara that says you could use erez? And the Gemara answers, erez doesn't mean erez cedar. Cedar is a very generic term for many types of wood, and one of them is a hadas. And believe it or not, a hadas is like a tree. I didn't. I guess I've never really seen a myrtle tree, but there's a trunk to it, and it has branch. I thought it was more of a bush, but I saw yesterday that it's actually a tree. So when it says that you're using boards from a myrtle tree, it means there is actually a possibility of getting a board from that tree, and it uses the Mishnah uses the Brisa uses the term erez from sounds like what we normally translate as cedar, but the Gemara says no. In halachic writings and in Torah writings, erez is more of a generic term, not only for cedar but for many other species, including hadas and shita and roish and tidhar and all different types of species. So that is, so when it says erez, it means, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, what did you use for schach? When that Brisa talks about using erez, it means you use the hadas, you use some type of beam from a myrtle tree. You were able to get a thick beam, and it talks about if how to make your sukkah a kosher sukkah if you have such a big beam, which could be problematic if it's too big. It looks like a roof, and so that's what the Brisa talks about. Okay, so that was the answer that the Gemara gave, that it's talking about specifically a hadas, even though it used the word erez. Erez normally means cedar, but erez also means many other trees as well fall into that category. I don't know why. Are they part of in some sense, they're part of the same family, maybe? We had someone who was an expert in botany or whatever. Must be some expertise in these fields. Someone could explain what the Gemara means. I mean, so it's really a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, and talks about this. Maybe over the other commentaries talk about it. Why is erez? What is this? Is it one family? Is that why, or is it just the term happens to be borrowed? The erez term maybe is just used in many different places, and each type of tree that somehow has some similarity to an erez or something, but or are they actually all related? But anyway, the bottom line is that we're translating it that even though it says erez, it means hadas. Okay. Then comes the next Gemara, and the next Gemara we started. It was about, the Meir says you don't have to tie it with its min. You don't have to tie the lulav, the hadassim, and aravis with its same species. You could use anything to tie it. You want to use a rubber band, you want to use a mashicha, some type of rope, you use a rope. So then the Gemara says we have a brisa, and the Gemara brought this brisa, talked about Yakire Yushalayim, which the translation of Yakire, Yakir is a precious or valuable, and the translation the understanding is that it's referring to the dignitaries of Yerushalayim that were wealthy, and they would use gimoiniyos shel zahav. They would use golden strands to tie their lulav, and that was said as a proof that Reb Meir was proving that you don't need to use to tie your lulav with the hadasim and aravos. You don't need to use the species of the lulav hadasim and aravos, but you could really use even gold, anything you tie it is good. That's Reb Meir's proof, because the Yakira Yerushalayim used to do that. And the Gemara says on that, different ways of reading the Gemara, he's either disproving them or he's proving himself. He's even not only disproving them, but he's even taking it a step further and saying, you're totally wrong, I'm right. And what would his proof be? What he says is, Misham Raya, from there, it's a proof to me, he says. From there, it's a proof to me. The other way of reading it is, Misham Raya, from there, you're bringing a proof? It's like a rhetorical question. Like, you think you could bring a proof from there? That's not a proof. Or he's taking it further. It's from there, it's a proof to what I'm saying. It's from there, it's a proof to the opposite opinion. That they're not like you're saying, because they would tie it with the actual species of the Daled Minim below, and they also put gold on top. The gold on top was additional. The real tying was really with the minoi, with the type, with one of the species of the Daled Minim of the 4 species. That's what they tied it with. The gold was considered extra. And what's the proof that they obviously needed to tie it with minoi, with the type of from the Daled Minim, with an item that was used for the 4 species? What's the proof to the opposite view, if you want to learn that way? The fact that they used a piece of the Daled Minim to tie it, a piece of the 4 species, and they didn't use gold for both ties. Why did they put gold on top and gold on the bottom? Why did they use something else? It must be because that they have to do it that way. The gold on top is an extra, as a bonus. They wanted to make it nicer. They put gold. But the actual thing, otherwise they were wealthy. They could have done gold on the bottom as well. Why didn't they use gold on the bottom? That proves that gold is not acceptable for the actual tying. You really need to use one of the items from this 4 species. After you have that, you put on gold. And so that's the proof from this story. It's Yakira Yerushalayim. It's a little different than the Mishnah. The Mishnah's case didn't prove. They just said that they would do it milmata. But there you don't have any proof that they needed to, because it could be that they couldn't afford it. In the Mishnah, we don't know. We're talking about wealthy people. In the Brisa, we're talking about wealthy people. There, we're not to the Mishnah. We're not talking about wealthy people. So maybe they tied it. They wanted to tie it in 2 places. They could afford. There was. They could afford to pay for 1 strand of gold. 2 strands of gold was too much, and so the Mishnah, you don't have a proof. The Gemara brings a Brisa where you see that. Now, then we started these statements here with Rabbah and Rava. Rabbah says, what was the first statement of Rabbah? The first statement of Rabbah is that there were people who used to make the Megadlei Hoshana. They would tie the lulav with the adasim and aravos, tie it together in the house of the exilarch. And Rabbah would tell them that make sure that you leave a little space on the bottom to hold. So you're tying the stuff together, okay, but make sure on the bottom we could hold it in a place where there's not going to be a chatzitza. Chatzitza is a term often used in the laws of mikvah. It's much more applicable for women. Women are obligated to go to the mikvah, and they have to be careful that there's no any separation between their body and the water could invalidate their mikvah. So, for example, they're careful to remove their makeup. They're careful to remove their whatchamacallits, their nail polish, any hair that's loose on that's on their body that is really detached, but it's touching their body, could be a hefsek, could be a chatzitza, could be a separation from the mikvah. That's the term chatzitza is often used in halacha regarding mikvah. Here we're using it regarding shaking the lulav. When you shake the lulav, you're supposed to hold onto the lulav and shake it. Now, what happens if you hold on to the thing that ties the lulav? If you're holding on to the thing that ties the lulav, so Rabbah says that could be a problem. That is a problem. And Rashi over here says that he says, leave a little space under the tie so you don't end up holding it by the tie, because Rabbah holds the eged, the tie is not part of the mitzvah, because he holds like the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said it has to be tied. The other opinions are it doesn't have to be tied. If you want to tie it, you could tie it. It's a nice thing to do, but you don't have to tie it with these daled minim. You could tie it with anything. But he holds that, so Rabbah holds you don't need to tie it in the first place. So if you do tie it, it ends up that tie is not part of the mitzvah. And so if it's not part of the mitzvah, so when you hold it, this would be called a chatzitza, separation. If the tie is part of the mitzvah, so it's all one entity of the mitzvah that you're shaking. If it's not part of the mitzvah, it's just the beautification, then in such a case, in such a case, you're going to be separating between your hand and the eged. And so, so that would be a problem of chatzitza. There shouldn't be a chatzitza. Since the lulav doesn't need to be tied, it's no longer a mitzvah. It's not called lakicha. You're not taking it. You're taking something else. You're holding on to you're taking the wrap around. You're not taking the actual lulav. So this is a problem of chatzitza. You have to take it. You're chatzitza. So this is Rabbah's opinion. Now we obviously don't follow that, because most minhagim in today's day, if I'm not mistaken, we all shake the lulav where you have the tie around, where the rings are. That's where you hold it to shake it, right? Where Rabbah didn't hold of that. Rabbah held that that this would be a problem to do that, because there's no mitzvah to tie it. So when you're holding it there, you're actually holding onto the tie. You're holding onto the ring. You're not holding onto the lulav. Rava says, that Rava said that when you're doing it for beauty, so to beautify the lulav, so that would not be called a chatzitza. It's not ma'akiv, doesn't interfere and interrupt your holding it, and it's part of the mitzvah. It's l'tzorech mitzvah. It's not exactly the mitzvah, but it's l'tzorech. It's for the purpose of the mitzvah, to beautify it. Anyway, bottom line is it's not a chatzitza according to Rava. It's to beautify it. So it's to beautify it. It's not considered a separation. Okay, that's where we got up to yesterday. We are on Daf Lamed Zayin, page 37a. 37a, and we're up to the next statement of Rabbah and Rava, who's going to argue. So we're up to, it must be about 10 lines from the bottom of the page, 37a, Ba'amar Rabbah. Maybe 11 lines up from the bottom of the page. Ba'amar Rabbah, and Rabbah says, Loy linkut inish, a person should not take Hoshana besudra. Your lulav, which the Gemara calls Hoshana, saw that in the previous paragraph, that the Gemara calls the lulav together with the hadassim and aravas, it calls it a Hoshana, a salvation, a Hoshana, saving, a saving. Don't take that besudra with a scarf. Don't take it with a scarf. Some type of sudra is used as like a handkerchief or a scarf. So the Gemara says don't use the Rabbah says don't use that to hold your Hoshana, your lulav and your lulav. Why shouldn't you hold it with a scarf interfering with the wrap around the scarf around your hand and use it almost like a glove? Why can't you use it have gloves when you're shaking the lulav? Because you need to have, it has to be lakicha tama, a complete taking. And here it's not called a complete taking unless you hold it with your hand and you don't have a glove on. Now, this actually was very applicable in when COVID was going around. People were wondering about using gloves when they shake their lulav and giving it to other people to shake. Can you use a glove? If people wear gloves, maybe it was safer. They were, I remember the discussion about it. And if I remember correctly, they said that you can't use gloves when you're shaking the lulav. Can't say a bracha. If someone's using a glove, can't say a bracha to shake it. If I remember correctly, of course, we could look it up. I'm sure it's online. You could probably find the laws that they were distributing, announcing different laws during COVID or different halachas that came applicable. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, isn't there that story about the Kohen got in trouble for using a scarf on his hands?
Yeah. He didn't want to get his hands dirty with the blood.
Right.
So he used it, and the rabbis weren't happy with him. Yeah. Okay, so here Rabbah says you can't use a sudar, which is like a scarf or some type of glove, using it like a glove. They can't use it because we need lakicha tama. Where do we have lakicha tama before? We had it when we spoke about you need to take all daled minim. You need to take all four the species. You can't if you don't have one of them, then you're missing the mitzvah. And there was the mitzvah can only be accomplished if you have all four. And that was where we had a discussion. Do you have to hold all four at the same time? Could you hold one at a time? Anyway, here the same law, lakicha tama, it has to be a complete taking. So complete taking, the way we understood it there was you have to take all four. You can't get away with missing out in one of the species. Here we're taking it to mean that you have to hold the whole thing. You have to hold it with your hand and not through a some type of glove. This make do glove that they used, a sudra. Now Rava Amar. Now Rava says lakicha yedei davar acher. When you take it through something else, like in this example that you're holding it with a glove on, shma lakicha, that's called taking, and you could fulfill your obligation with such a method of shaking the lulav, and somehow this wrapping around your hand becomes nullified to your hand. It's as if you're touching it, and it seems that it's connected to the fact that it's it's part of this idea of something could be bottled to you, and it would be considered as if you're holding it, or it's not considered anything different than you holding it. The question would be, Rava in the previous statement, he said it has to be for beauty. Then it's not choitzitz. So when you tied it to make the lulav beautiful, to make it nice, so it's tied together. So that was not a chatzitza. Now you're talking about using your sudder, your wrap around your hand, some type of a glove. Is this considered a beauty or not? If it's, in other words, do we need to rely? Is Rava relying on this concept that it's lenoi? He doesn't say it clearly here. He just says that lekicha yedei davar acher, taking it through something else, is not a problem. It's still called taking. Now, would that apply if it's something that's not beautiful, that's not something nice? Like, let's say it's I don't know, an undershirt. You put an undershirt over your hand, and you're using that. Would that be a different problem? Now, is he relying on his previous thing? That something that's lenoi is batel, something that's for beauty. Is he relying on that? They bring down, that seems to be a discussion over here. That what would happen if it's using a vessel? You know, you're holding it with a vessel. Notalas halulav bekli, would that work? I see the commentaries have a little discussion. Anyway, but this is the second statement of Rabbah that Rava argues on, and he holds that you would be allowed to use this type of glove. Now comes the next statement, in where Rava, the explanation, I should say, where Rava says, how do I know this? Amar Rava meno amino, how do I know this? That you could take something through something else. Because we learned about the dipping of the azov, which was the hyssop that was dipped into the ashes, the water that was mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. And they want to sprinkle it on top of a person or on top of a vessel that became tameh through a mace. When something is tameh through a dead body, they need to be sprinkled on the third day and on the seventh day with the waters of it's called mei chatos or mei para, this waters of that were mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. And so what they would do would be they would have little straws of these type of water mixed with the ashes, and you would dip the hyssop into the straw, and you would pull it out and sprinkle it on someone who is impure. So it says, Ditnan, we learned in a Mishnah, that what does it say? Ezov kotzer, if you have a very short branch of hyssop, so you can't stick it all the way down deep into this tube, into this straw that's holding, it's like a tube that's holding the ashes with the water of the red heifer, and you want to dip it in, but it can't reach the bottom. And so what do? It says mesapkoi, you lengthen it to make it longer, give it enough extra, you give it some extra length by bechut uvakush, with some type of a string, rope, like a string or a rope, or a kush, some type of a weaving needle. And you would push it in and be able to dip it into the azov, into the red heifer water, and that was water mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, and you'd be able to use that to sprinkle. Well, now that it was dipped into, it has some water of the red heifer, you can now pull it out and sprinkle it on the third day and on the seventh day. So the Gemara brings this Mishnah, and it says v'toivel, so you would be able to be toivel it, stick it into that water. You're not touching, you're not holding the hyssop now. You're holding this type of a rope, or you're holding this type of weaver's needle and weaving needle. And nevertheless, you pull it out, you toivel it, v'maila, and you pull it out of the you toivel it means you dip it into the water, and you pull it out from this type of tube. V'maila, you pull it out, you pull it up. V'oiches be'ezov, and you hold on to the hyssop u'mazeh, and you sprinkle it. And he asks, Amai, Why does it help that you could dip it, not touching it? You're dipping it without touching it because you're using something else. V'lakach v'toval amar Rachmana. It says you have to take the azov and you have to dip it into the water. It's part of the mitzvah of paraduma is to dip it. You have to be v'lakach. You have to take it and taval and you dip it. And here, what's dipping it? It's really the weaving needle that's dipping it. So elalav shmamina. Rather, we hear from this by taking something through something else. It's going to be considered taking, and the same law would apply to the lulav. That if you're holding the lulav through something else, that's called taking. The Gemara says, "Mimai, how do I know that taking through something else is called taking?" How do you know that? Dilma, because maybe Shani Hasam, there is different. Kivan de Chabre to Gufe Dam. Over there, it's different because you attached the hyssop to the item. So maybe normally when you use something else to hold something or to dip something, that's normally not called taking. But if you attach it, if you make it tied together, sewn together, so then it's considered like it's you're holding the hyssop because you're holding something that's attached to the hyssop. That's called oh. But if it's not attached, who says it works? The glove is not attached to your hand; it happens to be on it. Here, but there in the case, you attached it. That's why it worked over there. You attached the hyssop to that item, to this weaving needle. So Ella, the Gemara says, rather Rava comes and answers. I have another proof. Ella me hacha, rather from here. Again, about talking about the para aduma, the water of the red heifer. Nafal mishvei feres l'shaykes. What happens if, by mistake, the ashes fell from a tube into the place where you're going to mix the water? The shaykes is this trough that the water is there, and the ashes fell in. You didn't put it in; it fell in. So that is considered puzzle. In other words, what you're supposed to be doing is it's called kiddush mei chatos, or kiddush efer chatos, or efer apara. You're supposed to be mekadesh the water. Here you have ashes and you have water. You're supposed to be putting it in. You didn't do the kiddush of the mei chatos. Instead, it fell in. So the law is puzzle. It is invalid. The water does not become holy. It's not going to be usable. You have to actually put it in with intent. It has to be done properly. Now, so this is the teaching from the laws of paraduma. And now we turn the page. Hahipiloihu, but what would happen if he actually pushed it? If the person was holding the tube, he pushed it into the water, and mixed it. It's considered kosher. It's considered kosher, and the Gemara says, "Amai," or Rava says, "Why would that be so?" In other words, the Rava is saying, "What would happen if you pushed it in?" He did it with the intention. If it falls in, it's not good. If he pushed it in, it sounds like it'll be fine. Kosher. Why will it be fine? He makes the ad kavana. But what do you mean? He didn't actually physically do it with his physical hand. He did it it's in a tube. Amai, why is that considered kosher? V'lakhu v'nasan. He's got to take it take the ashes and he has to put it into the water, the mayim chayim, it's called the water. He has to put it into this water, and he did it with a tube. So it should be with, you're supposed to be the one taking it, you're supposed to be the one placing it. So rather we hear from this that that taking it through some other item, which means holding it with a tube that it's in, in pouring it with holding that tube, that's also considered kosher, and therefore the same thing would apply, Rava says, to holding the lulav with a glove on the lulav. Now comes the next Gemara. Va'amar Rabba, and Rabba says, Loilodutz inish lulava bahishana. Don't press, push in the lulav into the bundle that's already tied together. You shouldn't stuff it in. Don't stuff in the lulav into the bundle. Why? If you already tied it together, dilma natri tarfi, because maybe you're gonna fall off the leaves from the hadassim and the aravos, and they'll end up staying inside the lulav. V'havi chatzitza, it'll be a separation between each of the species of the lulav, because there's leaves that don't belong there, because they're not attached to one of the branches. They've fallen off. It's going to be your fault. You pushed them off, and now you don't need. And really, what you should be doing is untying the tie that's holding the hadassim and aravos. Untie it, put the lulav in, and then you won't have a problem of leaves that have fallen, that are loose, that fell off, and they would be a chatzitza. Again, this concept of a separation between the species. Now, Rava says min b'mino yener chaytzitz. Rava holds that if it's the same min, if it's a type of leaf from the hadassim, from the myrtles, a leaf from the aravos, these are not an issue, because it's the same min, it's the same item. It's not going to be a chatzitza if it's min b'mino. If it's the same type of thing, it won't be considered a separation. And so that's Rava's claim. The commentaries wonder, what did Rabbah hold? If it's the same speed, is really that a separation? If you have a loose a hadas leaf, is that a separation? So two options. One is that he either holds that it is a separation, or he's mesupik. He might be questioning if it's a separation. But that's the opinion of Rabba. Rava argues, it says min b'minoi einoi choitzitz. Now comes the next discussion of Rabba and Rava. A person shouldn't cut the lulav. If it's too long, you want to cut it. B'hoishana, while it is inside the tied up grouping of the minim, of the species of the lulav with hadassim and aravos, don't cut it then. The Retiree hutza, because you might end up leaving some of the leaves that you cut from the lulav. The lulav was too long, and what's going to happen is the leaves that were attached to the lulav spine, you've now cut off, because when you cut the bottom, you end up cutting a few of the base of where some of the leaves might be from. In other words, every area of the base has like two leaves that come out from it. So if you cut off an inch of the base, your two leaves now are going to be loose, are going to be just floating there inside your bundle that you tied together, but they're not attached to the lulav. If you cut through 2 inches, you probably have about 4 or 6 leaves that are going to be undetached. They're going to be detached leaves. So where you're concerned, Mishtayri Hutza, you'll have leaves, these long leaves of the lulav, and they'll be left. If a Rava Amar, and Rava says, Min b'minoi einoi choitzeitz, one species, same species as the other, is not considered a chatzitza. V'yamar Rabba, and Rabba says, Hadash shel mitzvah asur lahariach boy. And Rabba says the hadas of the mitzvah, you're not allowed to smell during the time of it, while it's being used during the days of Sukkah. It's considered part of the mitzvah of Sukkah, of lulav and esrog, and you can't benefit from it like by smelling it. Esrog shel mitzvah, hadas shel mitzvah asur l'rechba. The hadas, you can't smell it. Esrog shel mitzvah, but the esrog mutar l'rechba. The esrog you're allowed to. So that the hadas, the myrtle, which has a very good smell, you can't smell. The esrog you're allowed to smell. What's prohibited for the esrog? It's prohibited to eat. And this is where we had the problem on the previous Gemara, that you weren't allowed to, that how did he do it? You're not supposed to eat it during, it's set aside for the mitzvah. We had a Gemara page before that said that one of the rabbis cut off a piece of his esrog and they ate it. Here we've got the source of where you're not allowed to eat the esrog. This is what I was mentioning during when we learned that Gemara, that there is a problem because you're not allowed to eat you're not allowed to benefit from the esrog at least during Sukkot. He had different answers that we explained over there, that maybe he had a few esrogim, he didn't set aside this it was a later day in Sukkot, so he only set aside the part of the esrog that's necessary for the mitzvah, and the other part of the esrog was not considered part of the mitzvah. Different understandings of how you could get around this problem. But anyway, the Rabbah is telling us that according to the letter of the law, there's a problem with a hadas, smelling it. And esrog, you don't have a problem of smelling it, it's a problem of eating it. My timer, what's the reason that there's, what's the reason? So hadas de l'reicha koi, the hadas that's meant for smelling, that's what it's used for. So ki aktie, when you set it aside for the mitzvah, mereicha aktie, you're setting it aside from smelling it. Esrog de l'achila koi, an esrog that's meant for eating purposes, it's set aside, that's what it's normally used for. So ki aktie, when you set it aside for the mitzvah, so what you're really doing is removing it from usage, from what its normal usage is, and me'achila aktie, you're setting it aside from the regular way of benefiting from the esrog, and that is from eating it. But from a smell, that's not what it's mainly for. So therefore, it wouldn't be a problem. You would be able to smell it. Okay, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone.
Rabbi.
Yes, David.
I don't know if there's a lot of background noise with me, but I want to just say it always has over here the halacha. So it says it's prohibited to smell the hadas being used for the mitzvah daled minim. Technically, one may smell the esrog being used for the daled minim. However, since there's a dispute whether one says a bracha when smelling the esrog, one should refrain from smelling it due to the uncertainty. Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 653-1.
Thank you. Shkoyach. Okay.
I just don't want anybody to go and smell the esrog before the next year.
Right. In case we don't get up to the halacha by Sukkot next year.
Right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Sei gesund. Take care.